thrown out over lies. I handed him divorce papers. The chaos that followed was everything. Hey, Reddit. I need to get this off my chest. My stepson spent months systematically dismantling my marriage with calculated lies. When his dad finally texted, asking me to come home and apologize for my behavior, I showed up with a folder of evidence that ended everything. What followed was absolute, beautiful chaos. But before I get to that disaster, let me set the scene. I was standing in my driveway in San Diego, California, at 4 p.m. on a Tuesday, watching my clothes sail out of the second-story window like sad, expensive confetti. My husband, Elijah, was up there, his face red with a volcanic rage I'd never witnessed. He was screaming at me to get out of his house. Except, it wasn't his house. It was mine. But we'll get to the deed later. Just this morning, we were having coffee and talking about a weekend trip to Julian. Everything seemed fine. Now, his 17-year-old son, Jake, was standing behind him, leaning on his shoulder like the devoted, traumatized son. Jake was playing the comforter, but his eyes met mine for a fleeting second through that window, and I swear I caught the faintest hint of a smirk. That smirk was a punch to the gut. It told me this wasn't a misunderstanding or typical teenage drama. This was calculated, planned, and perfectly executed by a kid who'd been playing three-dimensional chess while I was stuck playing checkers. The setup, from coffee shop bliss to high school rivalry. My name is Becky, and I'm 38. I work in industrial equipment sales, the kind of boring job that pays well but makes people's eyes glaze over at cocktail parties. I've been with the same company for 12 years, steady income, great benefits, zero workplace drama. I met Elijah 4 years ago. He was the kind, steady manager at a local coffee shop. He was a widower who had lost his wife 3 years prior. His son, Jake, was 13 then, a quiet, lost-looking kid. I understood loss leaves scars, especially at that age. I fell for Elijah hard and fast. He made you feel like you were the only person in the universe when he spoke to you. 8 months later, I proposed we build a life together. He said yes, tearing up. I promised them both I would never try to replace Jake's mom, but I would be a constant, reliable presence. The first 2 years were genuinely great. Jake was distant, sure, but I didn't push. I helped with homework, drove him around San Diego County, and paid for his phone and clothes, never keeping score. When Elijah and I got married, I bought us a bigger house in the suburbs so Jake could have a proper space, not the cramped apartment they'd been in. Elijah was thrilled. We were happy. Looking back now, I can pinpoint the moment the poison started dripping. About 9 months ago, Jake started making these little, subtle comments to his father. I'd walk into the room and catch snippets. He'd tell Elijah how handsome he was, how he deserved a queen who treated him like a king. At first, I thought it was sweet. Then came the comparisons. Anytime Elijah and I set a boundary, a curfew, homework requirements, basic chores, Jake would drop some variation of, "Mom would have let me do this," or "Mom understood me better." Elijah would shut it down initially, but the comments were subtle and constant, like water eroding stone. Jake would also question why they had to follow my rules in what he constantly called their house. Never mind that I had bought the house, my name was the only one on the deed, and I paid the mortgage monthly. In Jake's warped reality, I was just a tenant. I suggested to Elijah that we should consider family therapy, maybe Jake was struggling to adjust after all this time. Elijah waved it off as typical teenage drama and told me I was oversensitive. But I started noticing him looking at me differently, like Jake's words were planting seeds of doubt that were finally starting to sprout. The performance and the $35,000 car. 4 months ago, things got weirder, to the point where I genuinely felt like I was losing it. Jake became a completely different person depending on whether his father was in the room. When Elijah was around, he was friendly Jake, laughing with me, asking about my boring equipment sales stories, and acting like we were buddies. The absolute second Elijah left the room, poof. His face would go blank, completely neutral, like someone had flipped a switch and turned off his personality. If I tried to engage, I'd get flat, one-word responses while he stared at his phone. Elijah returns. Boom, friendly Jake, animated and charming, would reappear. I was starting to feel insane, but the pattern was too consistent, too deliberate. The kid was performing for his dad and dropping the act the instant his audience was gone. The real explosion, the irreversible beginning of the end, happened when Jake asked me for a car. Not a used Honda. He wanted a $35,000 BMW, like his friend Tyler had gotten for his 17th birthday. I sat him down and tried to be reasonable. I explained that $35,000 was financially insane for a first car. I offered to find him a reliable used car for around $10,000 and suggested he get a part-time job to help with the insurance. He stared at me like I'd suggested he walk everywhere barefoot. Then his face crumpled, and he ran upstairs, where his loud, dramatic sobs carried through the entire house. That night, Elijah was ice cold. He questioned why I was denying the kid, pointing out everything Jake had been through, asking if it would really kill me to just give him this one thing. I was shocked. I told him $35,000 was objectively irresponsible. He turned away from me in bed and said, "You just don't understand what it's like to be Jake's father." After that, everything changed. I was the enemy. Jake started having these whispered conversations with Elijah that stopped abruptly when I entered a room. Elijah would give me this tight, forced smile and change the subject. He began questioning me out of the blue, asking if I truly liked Jake, why Jake felt like I was different when Elijah wasn't around, whether I resented him being in our lives. Every time I defended myself, he'd counter with, "Why would my son lie about this?" It was the perfect trap. How do you prove you didn't give someone a certain look? How do you disprove vague accusations? Jake was building a narrative that was impossible to challenge, creating an image of me as a two-faced monster who only showed her true colors when we were alone. The fights became regular, Elijah confronting me about something Jake had said, that I'd snapped at him, rolled my eyes, or made a comment about his grades. When I tried to defend myself, Elijah would ask if I was calling his son a liar. The final nail, a bruise and the ejection. 2 weeks ago, everything exploded in the absolute worst way possible. I came home from work, exhausted. Elijah was waiting at the door, and the look on his face made my stomach drop. He grabbed my arm, not affectionately, but hard. His voice was shaking as he said we needed to talk about what happened with Jake. I had no idea what he meant. I'd been at the office in downtown San Diego since 7 a.m. He pulled me into the living room where Jake was sitting on the couch, looking genuinely scared. Elijah pulled up Jake's sleeve to show me a dark, palm-sized bruise on his forearm. "Jake told me you grabbed him this morning," Elijah said, tears in his eyes. "He says you've been getting aggressive when I'm not home. He's scared to be alone with you." My world tilted. I screamed that it wasn't true, that I'd never touched him, that I'd been at work all day, and he could check the timestamps on my security badge swipes. But Elijah backed away from me like I was dangerous. He said he hadn't wanted to believe Jake for months, but the claims were too specific, too consistent to ignore anymore. I begged him to really think about whether he'd ever seen me be violent in 4 years. He pulled away and said, "That's what's so scary, Becky. Jake says you're like two different people." That's when I saw it. Jake, still sitting on the couch, watching us. For just a split second, his expression was completely neutral, almost curious, like he was watching a science experiment. Then he caught my eye, and his face instantly crumpled into fear again. He ran to his father, screaming that he heard yelling and begging him not to let me hurt him. That performance broke Elijah completely. He told me to pack a bag and leave. He needed time to figure things out and make sure his son was safe, telling me to get out of his house until he could think clearly. I packed with shaking hands, throwing clothes into trash bags because I couldn't even find my suitcase. As I loaded my car, I looked up and saw them in the upstairs window. Jake had his arm around his father, comforting him. But when he thought I couldn't see his face clearly, I caught him looking down at his phone and smiling. That smile was the final confirmation. This was planned. I drove straight to my brother David's house in La Jolla, my entire life in trash bags in the back seat, with one question hammering in my mind: how long had this 17-year-old been planning to destroy my marriage? 3 weeks of silence and the cold reality. I spent the first week at David's place in complete shock, barely functioning. David kept telling me to fight back, but what was the point? Elijah had already decided I was the villain in the story. I called Elijah maybe 50 times. Every call went to voicemail. I texted, begging for a chance to talk, but he never responded. By the second week, the shock wore off, replaced by something cold and analytical. I started connecting the dots: Jake's perfectly timed, scared act, the bruise appearing right after the car fight, the whispered conversations. If this was a manipulation, I needed proof. Undeniable proof. I called an attorney first, a family law specialist named Patricia Thompson, who came highly recommended. She listened patiently and asked one crucial question: do you own the house? I told her yes. I bought it before the marriage, my name was the only one on the deed. She nodded, saying that gave me leverage, but we needed to move quickly on divorce paperwork if that was my choice. I told her I still hoped Elijah would come to his senses. Patricia gave me a sad smile. In my experience, when someone chooses to believe the worst about you without evidence, they've already made their choice, Becky. That hit me hard. Next, I hired a tech consultant, a guy named Brandon. I explained the situation and asked if there was any legal way to access Jake's digital footprint. Brandon wasn't surprised. Teens leave digital trails everywhere, he said. If he's been planning this, there's evidence somewhere. He suggested starting with the family phone plan, which was in my name. The smoking gun, lies, theft, and video evidence. It took Brandon less than a week to find the first bombshell. He had printouts spread across his desk, phone records, bank statements from the joint account Elijah and I used for household expenses. Our account had been bleeding money for almost 6 months, $8,000 in total, withdrawn in increments small enough that I hadn't noticed while working 60-hour weeks. The charges were for gaming equipment, expensive clothes, electronics, and food delivery, all tied to Jake's spending. What made my blood run cold was that Elijah had to have known. Several charges required parental approval. The bank statements showed Elijah had transferred money from our savings to cover overdrafts Jake created. He had been actively hiding the theft from me. Then Brandon pulled our credit report, perfectly legal since it was my credit. Elijah had applied for a credit card in just his name 2 months ago, right when Jake's campaign intensified. He'd maxed it out almost immediately, another $4,000, mostly on stuff for Jake. This wasn't just Jake manipulating his father. Elijah had been actively deceiving me too, prioritizing his son over our marriage and our financial stability. There's more, Brandon said quietly. Your family phone plan includes cloud backup for all devices. Jake's phone has been backing up to your account this whole time. He showed me the data, deleted text messages that had automatically backed up before Jake erased them from his phone. Messages between Jake and his friends going back almost a year detailing his plan. A message from 8 months ago: Mom's starting to doubt her. Just got to push a little harder and the old lady's gone. In a conversation 6 months ago, Jake literally wrote out his strategy: Dad always believes me when I cry. It's so easy. There were messages about the car, about how I was a cheap jerk, who didn't understand that he deserved nice things, and how once I was gone, his dad would finally sell the boring suburban house, and they could move to the city where his friends lived. But the worst message, the one that made me physically sick, was from 3 weeks ago, right before the explosion, almost there. Got the bruise ready. Going to show Dad tonight. This should be the final nail. He'd planned the bruise. He deliberately hurt himself to frame me. Then, Brandon clicked on a video file from Jake's cloud storage, likely recorded accidentally. The video showed Jake in his bathroom alone, looking at his forearm, then deliberately slamming it against the edge of the bathroom counter, wincing, but doing it again and again until a dark bruise formed. "This better work," he muttered to himself in the video. I sat there, watching this 17-year-old abuse himself to destroy my life. What had I done to deserve this level of calculated cruelty? The subsequent messages confirmed his motive: money and location. Jake wanted his dad to sell my house and move to the city where his friends were. He figured the divorce would force Elijah to seek a fresh start somewhere else. I was just the obstacle. The confrontation, apology demanded, divorce delivered. I had everything: the financial deception, the manipulative messages, and the damning video of him creating the bruise. Patricia Thompson said it was more than enough for a divorce with an extremely favorable settlement. That night, 3 weeks after he'd thrown me out, I finally got a text from Elijah. "Have you had time to think about your behavior? Jake says he's willing to give you another chance if you apologize to him and commit to doing better. We can talk about you coming home if you've really reflected on what you've done." I stared at that message. He wasn't asking if I was okay. He wasn't apologizing for his silence. He was demanding I apologize to the kid who had orchestrated this entire nightmare, stolen $8,000, and framed me for abuse. I texted back just 4 words: "Come over tomorrow, 3 p.m. I spent the night organizing the evidence into a manila folder, printing the messages, the bank statements, and putting the video on a small USB drive. Tomorrow, our marriage was going to end. Elijah arrived at the coffee shop exactly at 3 p.m. I chose the location deliberately: neutral territory, public space, plenty of witnesses. He walked in, looking tired and nervous, probably expecting a broken, apologetic wife. He slid into the seat across from me with a cautious smile and immediately started talking about how he and Jake had been discussing things, and maybe if I committed to therapy, we could find a way forward. I held up my hand to stop him. Then, I slid the manila folder across the table. "Open it," I said flatly. He hesitated, then picked up the folder with shaking hands. The first thing he saw was the divorce paperwork, officially stamped, already signed by my lawyer. His face went white. He started to protest. "Becky, we can work through." "Keep looking," I interrupted. He flipped through the pages. I watched his expression shift as he saw the bank statements, the credit card bills, and the highlighted charges showing $8,000 of our money spent by Jake. He mumbled, "I can explain. Keep going." Then he got to the printed messages, Jake's conversations laying out his entire manipulation strategy. I saw the exact moment Elijah read the words his son had written about how easy it was to make him believe him, about how the old woman would be gone soon. His hands began trembling. "These can't be real," he whispered. "These could be faked." That's when I pulled out my phone and played the video, volume low enough that only he could hear it. Jake's voice came through clearly as he slammed his own arm against the counter. "This better work." Elijah's face crumbled. He dropped the papers, covering his mouth, mumbling about how Jake had cried, how scared he seemed. "He played you," I said, my voice cold and hard. "For months, he systematically destroyed our marriage because he wanted you to sell my house and move to the city with him. It's all there in the messages." He stared into space, whispering, "No, no, no." His entire world was cracking open. When he finally looked back at me, tears were streaming down his face. "Why didn't you make me see?" he asked, sobbing. "Why didn't you tell me?" That question broke the last bit of me. "I tried," I said, my voice rising slightly. "I begged you to talk to me. I called you 50 times. You wouldn't even answer. You chose to believe Jake without evidence, without even asking for my side. You threw me out of my own house based on lies." He reached across the table for my hand. I pulled back before he could touch me. "I was protecting my son," he said desperately. You were supposed to be my husband, I countered. You were supposed to give me the benefit of the doubt after 4 years of marriage. You were supposed to ask questions, demand proof. You didn't, because deep down, you'd already chosen Jake over me. The grand finale, the scheme collapses. Just then, the coffee shop door slammed open. Jake walked in. He must have been waiting in the car outside, unable to stand not knowing what was happening. He spotted us immediately and stormed over, face red with anger. "What are you doing to my dad?" he demanded loudly, making every customer turn their head. Then he saw the papers scattered on the table. For a second, real panic flashed across his face, but he quickly recovered. "Whatever she's telling you is a lie," Jake quickly said to his father. "She's trying to turn you against me. This is exactly what I warned you about." I picked up my phone and turned the screen toward him. The video of him creating the bruise was paused on a frame where his face was clearly visible. Jake's expression went from anger to shock, then settled on a furious glare. "You went through my stuff," he shouted. "You had no right. That's illegal." "You framed me for abuse," I said calmly. "So, I had every right." Elijah was staring at his son like he was a stranger. "Tell me it's not real," he begged, his voice cracking. "Tell me you didn't do this." And that's when Jake's mask finally came off completely. "So what if I did?" he yelled, his voice getting louder. "You were miserable with her anyway. She's boring. She's cheap. And she's not Mom. We should have left this stupid town a year ago." Elijah gasped, looking around at the staring customers. Jake kept going, seemingly uncaring about his audience. He ranted about his friends moving to the city, about how he was stuck here because of me, and how once the house sold, they could finally have a real life. "It's my house," I interrupted quietly. "Elijah can't sell it." Jake froze. His face went red again. He started sputtering about lawsuits and how his friend's mom got half of everything in her divorce. That's when I saw it, the moment Elijah finally understood the horror of what his son had become. He looked pale, defeated, and ancient. "You destroyed my marriage," Elijah whispered, "for money and a change of scenery. You made me believe Becky was abusing you so we could move to be near your friends." Jake's jaw dropped. He tried to backtrack, realizing how terrible it sounded out loud. "It wasn't like that. I just wanted us to be happy. She was ruining everything." I stood up slowly, pushing the folder toward Elijah. "You have 30 days to find a place," I said firmly but quietly. "It's stated in the divorce papers. After that, I'm taking back my house." Elijah was devastated. "Please," he begged. "Give me time to process this, to fix what's broken." But I was done. "There's nothing to fix," I said. "You chose to believe I was a monster without evidence. You let your son manipulate you for months and never once questioned it. Even now, knowing the truth, you're asking me for another chance, but you never gave me a first one." He broke down, sobbing into his hands, while Jake stood there, arms crossed, still defiant, even though his entire, carefully constructed scheme had collapsed around him. I gathered my copy of the papers, turned to Elijah one last time, and said quietly, 30 days. Then I walked out. The aftermath. A month later, Patricia Thompson called to confirm they had moved out on time. They found a small, 2-bedroom apartment across town, nothing like the house they had left. Elijah tried to fight for a financial settlement, but he had zero legal ground. The house was mine before the marriage, and he was complicit in the theft from the joint account. David, through mutual friends, told me Elijah was devastated and barely functioning at work. Jake was reportedly making his life miserable, blaming him for not moving faster, for not selling the house, for ruining his plan. Their relationship was strained to the breaking point. Jake was treating him with the same manipulative contempt he had shown me, now that his scheme had failed and he was stuck in the same boring town he tried so hard to escape. Sometimes, late at night when the house is too quiet, I feel a pang of sadness. I remember the good times before Jake's poison took root. But mostly, I feel relief. I dodged a bullet. You can't build a marriage with someone who doesn't trust you. And you definitely can't love someone who will throw you away the moment it becomes convenient for his 17-year-old manipulator. I learned the hardest lesson of my life, but I walked away with my dignity, my house, and my sanity intact.